school days as round towers. One of the things about this entire site is how simple everything used to be. When I came up here as a little kid on my bicycle, we had a date for the church, 1605. Turns out it was nonsense. It's much, much older than that. We also had a beautiful round tower, and I knew from Maurice Friel's lessons down in St. Anne's National School in Ardclough that the round tower had a high door, because when the Vikings would come over the hill and the clever monks would all gather up all their valuables, run up the ladder and pull the ladder up and close the door of the round tower, and the Vikings couldn't get in. And then there was a smart fellow at the back of the class said, why didn't the Vikings just knock out a stone and light a fire, and the round tower would act as a chimney, and everybody would get incinerated. So it turned out, as usual, that was nonsense. The round tower is quite complex, and the more research that's done into their service and their function and everything, the less we know. We are actually have competing theories as to what they were about, what they did, and what purpose they served. And one of the more interesting ones I'll be able to air here today. There are about 65 of them around the country. You can't get into this one. There's another story which I'm digressing here. Our plan for Heritage Week was to open the door of the round tower and let people up on a ladder and look into it for the first time since the late 1980s. But of course the key has gone missing. And the only man who knows where the key is, you'll be delighted to know, is buried over in the corner. And there is another issue here that we probably wouldn't be able to open it anyway. So we were not going to get to look into the tower, but in my childhood you could, and there was nothing to see. It was basically baked earth bottom and walls up there, but you could actually see track on where the staircase had been by the walls. And the key to it is, we have a dogfight here. The Vikings are coming, guys! The thing, it goes up in a circular fashion, and it goes clockwise round the tower, which is quite significant as well. All the round towers have this clockwise form that you get to the top. Now there's two round towers left, Patrick will correct me if I'm wrong on this, that you can actually visit. One is St. Canice's in Kilkenny, and we're lucky enough that the other one is in St. Bridget's in Kildare, not very far away. But I would highly recommend anyone who wants to get a handle on all that's changed about round towers since our school days and the ladder and the monks. All the research is very well put together in Clondalkin, the Round Tower Centre in Clondalkin. Patrick, do you want to come in on that?
Well, you've covered.
That's
certainly
good.
Everybody would be very welcome to the visitor centre in Clondalkin and visit our tower there. I don't want to go on because I'm not here to talk about the tower in Clondalkin, but here to talk about the tower in Oughterard. But just very briefly, we're very proud of the fact in Clondalkin that we have what we believe to be one of the oldest, if not the oldest, round tower of the 65 or so that remain standing.
Great.
So other than that,
fantastic, and they also have an herb garden, a medieval herb garden, very worth visit, and really key, it's free. It's actually a free visitor attraction, which there are very few of left in the country.
In the early 70s I climbed the one in Clondalkin. I was teaching in Clondalkin for 30 years.
Really?
And we weren't allowed it. We took the children, I'd say 71, 72 maybe, and I thought it was magical. So I went back recently to the centre and all that, but I couldn't even get to climb the wonderful barn. They won't let you. Maybe you're too old.
up to about 30 years ago you could climb the one in Clondalkin.
Yeah.
I loved it.
You just needed to go to a local cottage where the key holder
was, yeah. We
and
did that.
you could actually go on your own. But the OPW, who are the custodians of around tower, and in fact of most of them that are left, won't allow anyone to be
Oh, no, yeah, we weren't allowed even by the end of the 70s.
Yeah, right. First mystery about the round tower, what were they used for? Were they a keep for valuables? Were they something that it was left over from pre-Celtic times? Was it a phallic symbol? I wonder where they got that idea. Was it a place to give orations from? Is that what the elevated door was from, where somebody could actually hold up the chalice and give a sermon, the same way you've elevated pews in the great cathedrals. One of the common theory and the accepted one is from the word clig teach, and the word clig teach means, very simple, the house of the bell. So simply a bell tower, that seems to be the prevailing wisdom. Is that right, Patrick? Yeah, prevailing wisdom that they were serving as. And they would also be very important because the bigger people will know from medieval Spain and Italy that the families built huge towers in places like San Gimignano, and the more powerful you were, the higher the tower. So the way these monastic sites would work, you would build a high tower if you were very important. And it's very interesting, some of them don't have monasteries. Some of the towers are very, very out in their own remotely situated, and some of them are very important sites like Cashel and Kildare. But they do have this thing in common, that they're built almost exactly the same way, raised tower, shallow foundations, and that they have a conical top where the tops remain. And perhaps they were a bell because the bells were coming into fashion around the 7th, 8th, 9th century when the first towers were being built. They were generally, what we see today was built between around the 9th century and the 12th century. We think Oughterard was on the third phase of the building. One of the reasons, they're very hard to date. People used to date them in the 1800s by the material, but that's gone out of fashion as well. What we have now is much more, the width of the tower is significant and the craftsmanship that's involved. The tower is in local stone. If you go around to the back, you'll find shale. Shale is actually the local stone here in Oughterard. Limestone is also available here, and we have limestone around. But the limestone probably had to be quarried. If you go to Bean's quarry near here, there's some limestone, but shale is the local rock we have here. We certainly have a huge supply of limestone in Ardclough. Ardclough, the name, big questions about the name. How did it become Ardclough when there's no high stone there? But one of the theories floating around is the quality of the stone, very high quality limestone. You have a limestone tower, not very well built. People would say there's better craftsmanship, but the door is significant because the door is in a different rock. That granite, people used to say, the granite had to come from Wicklow. Realistically, local granite could have been found as well. You can overstate how much rock was carried around in those days. And we have beautifully carved doors. Some places, some people will know Timahoe and Leash has beautiful carvings on it. But one thing that does emerge is that the curvature of the top of the door in granite started coming in the round towers before it became common in churches. And that's one of the ways we have that's one of the significant signatures of the round tower. Okay, this is important. We know that Oughterard was burned about 12 times, and we do know that the tower was burned. And the reason is we still have the marks of the fire. Can you find the marks of the fire for us here? Oh, I can find it. Where you see the rock has been cracked.
Is it there? Are these burn?
Yeah.
Are these like burn marks?
Yeah.
Here.
Yeah. Anywhere there's sheared, and that was heat. And this, we know the two most famous burnings of Oughterard were King Sitrick. King Sitrick is famous for being the guy who didn't turn up for the Battle of Clontarf and survived. His head is on the first coin ever minted in Ireland. We actually, one of the few of that period we know what he looked like. And he burned the church in 995. And then Godfrey, who was the king of the Isle of Man, burned it in 1095. What would have happened at the front of the church, and the char marks are here at the front of the church, not at the back, is there was probably a structure against the tower that fell, that was burned and fell. The tower always faces towards the church. The door of the tower on a round tower in Ireland always faces towards the church. That's another mystery, secret of Oughterard. Why does it not face towards the church? Quite clearly, the original church was there, east facing, and when they built this structure here, it wasn't built by the same people. It came hundreds of years later. And all we know about the original church is bits of wood fell against it when it was burned, probably by Godfrey or probably by Sitrick, and it charred the stone. The politics of North Kildare in the 900s were like the 10 kings of Leinster were based here in Lyons, in the adjoining hill. This was their royal graveyard, this was their royal monastery, this was their royal church. The kings that were based, their cousins were alternating kings of Leinster, were based over in Mullamast and in Naas. And a great falling out from the 960s on ended up with the kings who were based here in Lyons seeking solace with an emerging king upstart from Munster called Brian Boru, who was consolidating his power. And he more or less went for an alliance agreement, the same way as India allies with America and Pakistan allies with China. They needed somebody to protect them. So the alliance between the Ardclough kings with the Brian Boru and the alliance with the Naas kings with the opposition, which was King Sitrick and the Danes of Dublin, led to a pretty major battle only a couple of fields away from here in 999, actually over the 999, 1000 AD. And it was fought in winter, which is unusual. It was fought in the little pass just below Castle Warden Hill, we think. And it was a victory for Ardclough and Brian Boru against the Danes. What did that do? It meant for 13, 14 years there was retrenchment, all of that sort of thing. And then we actually ended up with a bigger battle, which is the more famous Battle of Clontarf. But the prelim for that battle was the burning of this tower in 995. And the tower was probably built when the O'Dúnlainn were kings of Leinster, and it was a show of their power. They had the control of the monastery. They also, through an agreement, had the appointment of the Abbess of Kildare, the successor of St. Bridget. And if you go back to the written references to the history of this church, they're not very clear, but there's only 4 or 5 facts that we know. One was this was founded by another St. Bridget, not the Bridget of Kildare. Briga is how we term her to try and avoid confusion. And that another interesting saint, we have 2 saints from Oughterard. One is Bridget, and the other one is Ardclough, and she was of Bridget that founded the monastery we know nothing about, but she obviously was a commoner because they didn't claim any royal heritage or lineage for her, so they needed to find an important saint. Mochu, the patron saint of Clondalkin and Selbridge, he had royal lineage from King Carbra. So this other saint looms up in the martyrology of Tallaght, and she has royal lineage. So we have a monastery founded by a female saint very shortly after Bridget founded Kildare, and we have another abbess who was a saint, declared a saint as well. In those days you didn't have to get canonised. So we have 2 saints associated with them, but they say more about the politics of the Ireland of 700 to 1000, when we had a royal family, our own royal family in Ardclough, contending for the kingship of Leinster. This was their monastic spiritual home. The way that Slane is the monastic home for the kings of Tara, and Cashel had the kings and the monastic site on the same site. We had spirit. I'm loath to say the word monastic because we're not absolutely sure there was a monastic site here, but certainly it's a spiritual place, and it may even be pre-Christian. Okay, that's the round tower. They say that the top of it was probably repaired, but it was certainly in ruins for about 400 or 500 years, and it's not going to be ever in the books as one of the most outstanding round towers, but it's one of only 5 we have in Kildare. Does anyone know where the others are? There's Kildare Town, Tagadow, and that's really important, and Castledermot, yes. And the Tagadow is one of the oldest churches in the whole locality, and there is a certain suggestion that there would be a connection between Clondalkin here and Tagadow as very, very ancient spiritual sites. Again, Tagadow is even more remote and less to see than we have here, whereas Moon and Castledermot and Kildare have very, very important sites. Next stop, and I'm going to point out a grave up here. I don't need to go over there. If you look towards the church, where the buttress is holding it up, there's a very tall grave there. Just take note of that and have a look of it when we've stopped, because that may be more important than the grave we're just about to see. And if you gather around me, I'm going to be standing in by Arthur Guinness's grave into the right, into the church here.